I want to welcome you to the next one of our colloquia that we're calling Celebration of Faculty Careers. It's a program that we started in the last 2 years. And just to give you a very brief overview, it's for full professors who have reached the rank of full professor 7 years after, and then every 7 years to come and give a talk, a colloquium about their careers, their research, their life as faculty, and share basically the information with students, faculty, staff, basically all their colleagues. And then after they do this, they get to meet with the dean and the head and talk about some of their plans for the next 7 years. So it's a time to kind of look back and reflect, and at the same time plan for the future. And so today we're very privileged to have Professor James Caruthers, who is the Gerald and Sarah Skidmore Professor of Chemical Engineering. And I will not give you a long bio. I'm hoping he's going to talk about, his background. But I do want to tell you that all 3 of his degrees, BS, MS, PhD, are from MIT, and he joined Purdue in '77. And he's been a full professor for a long time, so he definitely qualifies for this. And I'm very much looking forward to what he has to tell us today. Jim.
Thank you all for coming. I hope they've got me mic'd up so many ways here. I hope all the mics are working. Good. All right. I'm going to talk today about 2 things. I'm going to talk about polymer mechanics, and then I'm going to talk about a little bit about the career path that I've been on. I better make sure my cell phone isn't vibrating or isn't ringing. Sorry. All right. Thank you. All right. Let's see if this whole thing works. All right, first of all, I need to talk about who did the real work, especially in the first half of the talk. First one I want to acknowledge is my partner, Grisha Medvedev, who's been with us for many years. He and I did the work together. It truly is a joint activity. And then I talked about a whole group of former students that have worked on this particular project, and we've been working on this for probably about 30 years. So it's a large group of students that have been there. I've had a number of collaborators, a number that have been outside the university, and these are sort of the A team in this particular field. And then I've also had some input from a number of my Purdue colleagues here, Ramki, Madi, Ollie Strachan in MSc, and Professor Pipes over in MSc. And then I've had a support from a long number of companies and governmental institutions. So I really do need to acknowledge all of these folks that are here. What I'm going to do is talk about 2 things today, since it's a little different seminar. Hopefully it'll be interesting to you folks. The first part, I'm going to talk about the traditional career path that I've had, and I'm going to use polymer mechanics. That's an area that I have some expertise. Now, I could spend the whole hour and fill up slide after slide with equation doing that, but I've decided in sort of the spirit of today's talk, that's going to be about half of the talk. And the other half of the talk is going to be some non-traditional career paths that I've had over the last couple of years. And there's really been happenstance of why they've occurred. And I thought, especially for the graduate student, that might provide you with a, sort of a path at least that one person took through the academy that's here. All right, let's first talk about the polymer mechanics part. This is a flowchart of the chemical industry. I do not expect you to follow the details there. The key thing to notice about this, and why you should be concerned about polymers, is that all of the things that are circled in red here are either polymers or they're precursors to polymers. Okay? The chemical industry truly makes 2 things. We make gasoline and oil, and we make polymers, okay? That's where all of the money is in this industry. For example, if you go to see terephthalic acid, it is a multi-billion-dollar product I doubt anyone has gone into Walmart and says, I want a gallon of purified terephthalic acid, okay? However, terephthalic acid is used to make a polyester, and the polyester is used to make fibers, and the shirt that I have on today has a fraction of its fibers in terms of polyester. So polymers are an important component, okay, of the chemical industry. It's sort of what the customer eventually buys. Oh, gee. And I surely don't want this to. Okay, so let me go backwards now. Okay, so this is the key here. Polymers are a key component of the chemical industry, and using the source that graduate students use, which is Google. You Google polymers and you see Wikipedia, and Wikipedia's statement is 80% of the chemical industry's output worldwide is polymers. So I hope to motivate the first part of the talk by the fact that polymers are something that most of you guys that go out to work are going to work in industry, because that's what actually is the output of the chemical industry. So with respect to polymers, polymers are usually used in the solid state. They're not used as, they are used occasionally as liquids, they're never as gases, but usually they're used by a mechanical engineer to make widgets or sprockets in the solid state. And so the polymer solids are what I'm interested in. And so when we talk about the classes of material, we can talk about gases, liquids, and solids, okay? There are polymers that are liquids, and they're usually non-Newtonian. Under solids, there's crystalline solids, which polymers are not. Polymers are semi-crystalline, okay, and polymers also can form the glass. So the two solids we're most interested in polymers are semi-crystalline polymers and glasses, and I'm going to focus on the glass state. So here's an issue about what the glass is. Glass is a disordered solid, and here are some of the examples of products that are made from polymer glasses. And they range from biomedical devices. These would be a hard contact lens. They're the material that electronic circuits are potted in. I have had a number of students that have gone out to work for Intel to actually understand how they use polymers in their electronic circuit, and it's made with aircraft. Okay, when you talk about the all-composite aircrafts, the thing that holds the aircraft together is a polymer matrix. So glasses are important in terms of application. They're disordered solids. Glass is considered probably the least understood state of matter. Very eminent Nobel-class scientists have said that the understanding of the glass is the key challenge in condensed matter physics today. Whoever comes up with an answer to that will receive a Nobel Prize. Okay, won't be us, but somebody will receive a Nobel Prize for that. All right, what is a glass? Okay, let's first start with what a crystalline material is. Okay, in a crystalline material, you start in the liquid, you cool it down to a melting point, and then there's a discontinuity in the volume. That's the delta V of mixing, or delta V of melting, I'm sorry, that is there. Okay? In addition to volume, enthalpy will show a very similar sort of change where there's a discontinuous transition. And these are called first order transitions. Now, what does a glassy material do? When a glass is cooled down from the liquid here, all of a sudden at a temperature that we call the glass transition temperature, or TG, there's a change in slope of the volume. And if we took the derivative of that, what we would see the coefficient of thermal expansion has one constant here at the glass transition, all of a sudden it changes to a second number. Piece. So if you wanted to approximate this as a step function, it would be a discontinuity and a derivative of the first order process of a crystalline material. So this is called sometimes a second order transition. And enthalpy does the same result. Enthalpy here doesn't undergo a discontinuous change. There's just a change in the slope, and then the derivative of this would be the heat capacity, and the heat capacity undergoes a change like this. So this is what a glass is. A glass is different than a crystalline material, and it has to do with this particular transition that is occurring at that point. So it would be nice if a glass had a unique glass transition temperature, much like a crystal has a unique melting point. but glasses don't. Here is a schematic of lots and lots of experimental data. If you cool a glass down, it transitions here at the glass transition temperature. Now, if you sit here for a while, it starts to move towards the equilibrium volume, which would be this line here, and then if you start to reheat it again, it moves over here, and now it heats up like this. So there's no unique temperature that goes with this. So the glass transition temperature is not a unique thing. It all depends upon temperature and rates that are there. So this volumetric response depends upon, it's time dependent, it depends upon the thermal history, it depends upon the heating and cooling rates, and it's highly nonlinear in its behavior. And so the general area that we talk about is nonlinear viscoelasticity for that material. Now, okay, we're getting a little closer to what we do in our group, okay? We do viscoelasticity, and this gives you an idea what viscoelasticity is, okay? In the first figure up here, we're going to take the strain, and we're going to put a step change in strain on a material. If we had an elastic material would respond like this green line. It would also respond with a step change response in the stress. Okay? If we had a viscous material, during this region the strain rate is 0. Over here the strain rate is 0. And the only place the strain rate is changing is during the step change, and it's changing infinitely fast. And so over here we would have a viscous material would have an enormous spike right here at when the step change is applied. Okay, a viscoelastic material doesn't look like a viscous material or an elastic material. It will come up like this, and then it will relax with time. So that's a viscoelastic material. It's somewhere between an elastic and a viscous material. And the key issue is things happen with time. Notice with an elastic material, there's no time dependence. With a viscous material, again, everything happens right during that step change. No time dependence. The key issue is a viscoelastic material has inherent time dependence. And polymers turn out to be viscoelastic materials. Now we can invert the experiment. Over here, instead of applying a step change in strain, we can apply a step change in stress. In that case, the elastic material responds again with a step change. A viscous material now, because the stress is constant here, will have a linear increasing strain, or if we took the derivative of that, a strain rate. And the proportionality constant would be called the viscosity. Viscoelastic material doesn't look like that at all. It sort of has this sort of somewhat exponential-like growth behavior. Okay? And here's another one, which is what we call a stress-strain curve. In this case, the strain is linearly increased with time. Okay? For an elastic material, it will track the strain, and it linearly increases with time. For a viscous material, it'll be constant, because the strain rate is constant, and then the stress is proportional to the strain rate, and the intercept of this line would be the viscosity. A viscoelastic material, especially a polymer one, shows this really interesting behavior where it increases linearly for a while, then all of a sudden it bends over, comes back. I mean, it's really an unusual response. And the challenge of our group is to try to figure out how do we model this viscoelastic response in nonlinear deformation experiments. And these are important in terms of application. Okay, now I showed you schematics before. This is a whole series of data. Okay, we see this stress-strain curve with that overshoot peak I showed you before, and notice that here it depends upon, I can't even read what we have here. Those are two different temperatures and different strain rates inside of there. So it's very temperature and strain rate dependent. Here's the effect of temperature again. Notice we're talking about a 3 or 4-fold magnitude, or 3 or 4-fold difference in the maximum the material goes through. This is the effect of pressure. This is the effect of stress, and we get nonlinear creep. So that what I want to tell you through this slide is the response is highly nonlinear, and it depends upon temperature and strain rate. And we have to grab that, and it also depends upon, this is time axis, it changes with time. So this is the sort of evolution that we would like to be able to model. All right, we do that via something called a constitutive model. Now you guys have all seen constitutive models before, okay? In conservation of mass, what we use is an equation of state. Volume is a function of pressure and temperature. That is a constitutive model. That's the material properties are built, the material properties are built, am I going backwards? Yeah, okay. Okay, here. Okay, so the constitutive model is built in as a volume as a function of temperature or pressure. When we talk about conservation of linear momentum, okay, in Cauchy's equation, which is that statement, we have to put a Newtonian fluid in, and that's a constitutive model for that material. But there are other models. When we talk about conservation of linear momentum, the fact that there's not no couple stresses tells us that the stress tensor is symmetric. Again, that is a constitutive model. So you guys have seen constitutive models so far in 620 and in your thermal course that's here. Energy, Fourier's law is a constitutive model that's there. All right, now we're going to come back up top to the stress equation, and there's other constitutive models other than the Newtonian fluid. If we took an elastic solid, instead of having the stress proportional to the strain rate, we say the stress is proportional to the strain that is here, and the proportionality constant is a shear modulus, G. Okay? For a viscoelastic fluid, it says the stress is a function of the deformation history. So we're going to be talking about models that are that have to have deformation history in them. All right, so when we solve a problem, and you did this in your undergraduate transport courses, okay, chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, we all do this. We start off with conservation of mass, momentum, and energy, and to that we add our constitutive models, equations of state. Let me try to change this. Remind me in 4 hours. Okay. Equations of state, and we start off with boundary conditions and initial conditions. And you guys, we assign you homework. We make you do the problems here. So in other words, this set is closed, but we've left out one piece of physics at that point. What about the second law of thermo? In other words, this system here is already fully specified. We can get problems. So when we add the second law of thermo, we are in fact adding something else to an already deterministic set. And so the question is, how do we handle this overconstraint? Because the entropy inequality, which is the second law of thermo, overconstrains the system. So getting things to satisfy thermodynamics, okay, while satisfying all of the mechanics is a challenge. All right, how do we do that? The simple models that we've talked about are what are called the linear viscoelastic constitutive model. And what this is, this is the stress history, this is the stress response to a strain history, okay? And the material property here is called the linear viscoelastic relaxation modulus. And so we usually express that as a sum of exponentials. And that's the way this is minus t over a relaxation time for the material of tau sub naught. That's a way we describe the material, okay? And so this would here would be how we would say if we put a step change of strain on the material, we see an exponential decay of the material, and we're going to model that exponential decay by a sum of exponentials. So this is the material property. But once we have that material property, we can solve it for any deformation history. We can get the stress response for that material. All right, now, what do? Don't need to follow all the equations here, okay? This is the simple idea. That's in one dimension. When we go to 3 dimensions, it comes down in very, very similar form, okay? This is still our shear response. This is the shear response, and that is the shape-changing part of the deformation. And over here is the bulk relaxation modulus, and that is the volume-changing part of the deformation. So all we've done is we've now had shape and volume change. Each one of them have their material relaxation functions. That's the shear viscoelastic modulus, and here is the bulk viscoelastic modulus. So basic ideas up here, but we now have to do it in 3D. The question that we asked, first of all, is how do we put temperature in all of this? And the Polymer people call this time-temperature superposition. And what it says is that relaxation time, which is a material property at a temperature T, is related to the relaxation time at a reference temperature T naught by this function A. So A sub T just says how does the time scale of the relaxation in the material change with temperature. Heat up the material, it relaxes faster. Okay? And the assumption is that temperature causes all of the relaxation times to increase the same way, and that's called thermorheological simplicity, or another name is time shift invariance for that material. So what it says is that material property that we had in the previous slide, that was the relaxation function, which we said is a function of exponentials. What we now do is instead of having it over just tau, it's A sub t times tau, because that's the relaxation that occurs at temperature T. Now, we do a little trick at this point. What we say is, okay, I can rearrange this. I can take this T over A sub T, and I can combine it into a new variable I call T star. So T star is the material time. Okay, and once I make that T star, then I get a much simpler expression. So what it says is that how does the material relax is dependent on how the material wants to relax. Doesn't matter on our time scale. What matters is from the material's perspective. And so this is called a material time or a material clock for the system. So that's what happened when it was isothermal. This is the generalization when you have non-isothermal response. So this says A sub T with the function of temperature, which is a function of time. But notice if temperature were constant, A would be constant. It'd come outside the integral. We could do the integral, and we get T over A sub T. So notice we recover this sort of T star that we had up here for the isothermal case. So this is just a generalization for non-isothermal material. So all of the effects of temperature history are contained inside of this A function. Now, what we've done, and my group has participated in this piece, it says temperature isn't the only thing that can affect deformation or affect the material response. In other words, if I pump energy into the material by mechanical work, that will affect the rate of relaxation as well. And so what we've done is we took this is the sort of general three-dimensional model that we have here. Notice this is the shape-changing part, that is the bulk part. Notice the relaxation now is occurring on this material time scale here, okay? And there's a third term, which is a thermal stress part, and it says how much stress comes when you increase the temperature but hold the volume constant. So this here is a thermodynamic, is a consistent way of modeling the process that's here. But the key issue I want to make you is that the nonlinearity is over here in this time scale via this red function A. So this is a generalized A sub T, one that depends upon deformation. And all of the action occurs now in what model you choose for A. So you can use a model of free volume, you know, in other words, that when you deform a material and it dilates, there's more free space and the material relaxes faster. That's the free volume, simplest idea. But there's other ideas that have been used there as, let me go backwards. I'm supposed to be going backwards, there we go. Okay, that stress could be affecting the rate of relaxation, strain could be. Again, this is just a small sampling of the hundreds of articles that are out there. We believe that a better description is one that's related either to the entropy or the internal energy, and this is the work that my group has done over the years. And the key issue is these are the ones that satisfy the second law of thermo, which is sort of a nice thing to say that you haven't built a model that violates second law. All right, so we have a model. How does it work? Well, this is some work we did with Sandia a number of years ago where there was an extensive testing program that they had. And so this one here is how volume relaxes, and there's data and modeling up there. This is how the stress strain curve moves. And so we get this bend over. It's called yield. This is enthalpy relaxation under two different thermal conditions, and we can again capture that. This is aging in the glass, and this is a complex loading, unloading experiment. So it did a pretty good job. Now, probably I've been wise to stop at that point and say, job done, and I quit. But we sort of noticed that we're not doing a real good job right here. In other words, we predict the overshoot, but this post-yield behavior, really we couldn't get. And for a while we tried to ignore it. For a while we tried to work and see how we can make things happen. And then we started to say, are there other things that are wrong? Okay? And it turns out when you start to look at the data completely, there's a whole bunch of other things that were wrong. So this T-star idea captures part of the physics, but something is missing. And we worked many years trying to figure out how to get that to work. At some point, we finally set back and says there's something more fundamentally wrong with this whole group of models that are out there. And what we said is the key assumption in all of these traditional models is the first statement you guys get in the continuum mechanics course, which is we're going to average all of the variables. Okay? So we're going to talk about average mobility, and we're going to say the average mobility is a function of the average state. That is the continuum postulate that is there. So that is built into all of this. And we started to say maybe that is something that we should question. Now, At the same time that was occurring, the glass physics community was having a major advance. And what one was finding out by a series of very clever experiments and molecular simulations is that the glass is an unusual state. It is heterogeneous, but only in the dynamic sense. If you look at a glass from a structural viewpoint, the glass looks spatially homogeneous. But if you look at dynamic probes on the nanoscale, you'll find regions that are low mobility, and you have other regions which are nanoscale separated from that have mobility that are 1 to 2 orders of magnitude faster. So you have a heterogeneous material from a dynamic sense. My view is whoever understands why that truly occurs will receive the Nobel Prize for understanding the glass. So this is a cartoon. These are two different molecular simulations. This one's probably the easiest one to look at. These are particle trajectories in 2D, and you see that there's regions of high mobility and then there's regions of low mobility. So I think it's pretty well established by both simulation and by experiment that dynamic heterogeneity is there. Now notice, this goes against the continuum postulate, because the continuum postulate says we smear everything out. And what we've said now here is on the nanoscale, we shouldn't smear things out. So what we did is we started to build a model that would do that, and this is probably the key idea that we have. Look at the first term here. Okay? What it says, divide through these first terms by t, dt. So this would say the rate of change of volume, okay, is equal to, and this is the change in temperature with time times this here's the coefficient of thermal expansion. So that's just normal temperature changes, material thermally expands, okay, and it all is slave to the rate of change of temperature. This one here is the relaxation part, and it says how fast does the material relax? Well, the relaxation is given by how far we are away from equilibrium volume, okay, by a time constant, and this time constant down here is our regular time constant T naught, which is the constant, times this A function. So this is how the time constant changes with volume and temperature. So very, very simple response. So it's one relaxation time process. It's called the Debye process. It's sort of a standard process in physical chemistry. And what we said was, maybe what we ought to do, because we have this nanoscale fluctuations that are going on there, that we're going to add noise. So all we did was we took the simplest one relaxation process and we added to it noise. Okay? And that's a Wiener process. Sorry, Ramke isn't here. He would have liked to have seen his Wiener processes actually used in a chemie lecture. And we have a coefficient out in front, which is the magnitude of that. But it turns out when you apply something called fluctuation dissipation as a standard thing in stat mech, it says that it puts a constraint on n, and it turns out once you know A, you get n with one parameter, the domain size. And so that's that's the key model. We just put white noise into a normal relaxation equation. So if we do that, all the nonlinearity is again buried in this log A function. This is the functional form. But the key issue is this log A is now local. It is what the instantaneous domain is doing. It's not been averaged out first. So that's the 1D model with Grisha. We made it 3D, and this is all the math that does that. Again, the key issue is this is a local, not global variable. So I'm not going to put you through the math, but you got the basic idea. What it says is local relaxation depends upon the local state. All right, so the key idea behind this whole modeling that our group has done over the last 5-10 years has been that it's the local mobility depends upon the local state, and the local state depends upon the local stress, local temperature, local volume, local energy, etc. So it's really a pretty simple idea. Okay? You don't do the continuum postulate up front. Okay? Does it work? Well, qualitatively, it's working really pretty nice. This is polymethyl methacrylate. It shows the stress strain curve and compression, and what we see are these curves that are here, and what we see is that we see this overshoot peak, we see what post-yield softening that is there, and it changes with how long we age it in the glassy state. So this changes with time. This is what the previous models were able to do. That was data. That was the models that were there, and the reason these models come through this even maximum has to do with a whole bunch of second-order terms that have funny funny coefficients. In other words, we were working really hard, okay, to try to make this one work, and that was the best we could ever do. And that's the best anyone ever did with those type of models. This one here is what the stochastic model predicts. It predicts, in fact, that we have post-yield, we have yield, we see this post-yield softening of the material, and we see it changes with aging time. So what it tells us is the model in its simplest form captures the right piece. And my view is getting simple models to capture the qualitative features is the first step before you start to worry about things. And so the origin of this, okay, is that the change in the width of the spectra during deformation. And I show that over here. This is what happens to the relaxation spectra of the material as deformation occurs. So we start off with the green curve when it's undeformed. As the spectra, as the material goes forward, we see the narrowing of the spectra, and then again we see it narrowing even more here. So what we see is we have a definite prediction of what happens. Now, what is really great about all of this, two things. Number one, the fact that the spectral width changes blows apart everything that polymer science has used up until this far. They've said the spectral width remains constant. So this is a fundamentally new prediction that is there. More than that, I have a colleague at Wisconsin called Mark Ediger. He's one of the premier polymer spectroscopists in the world, perhaps the premier. He's actually now measured the width of that distribution during deformation, and aha, it narrows. So we have independent confirmation that this really unusual response, which comes out of putting this fluctuations into the system, actually has been confirmed experimentally in the system. All right, now, this is sort of a roadmap for me and Grisha and the rest of our students, okay? Here is a series of experiments that can be done, and so this post-yield softening is just one column right here that is there. This is a series of whole different classes of models. We're now working on a major review paper for a chapter in a book, and what it says is these are the things that happen. Okay, this stochastic model is down here. This is the one that uses local results. Most people say, aha, I'm going to do linear, I'll pick one. I'm going to do the stress-strain behavior, and they spent their whole career right here in looking at this. Okay? And what we said is, nah, you need to back off and look at the whole response. And so we've had some success down in here. We are at least qualitatively able to get experiments that other models aren't able to do. But notice there's a lot of yellow that sits up here. Work remains. And so we're doing that as we speak. So this one here is the I'm finishing up on the first half of my talk. Okay? Key issue here is you have traditional continuum mechanics, and the methodology there is that you temporally and spatially average all variables, and then it applies at a point. Remember, we can take derivatives of those average variables all the way to a point. So that's a pretty profound assumption. The fact that it works for most materials is absolutely amazing to me. And then once you have done the spatial average, then you formulate a relationship called the constitutive model between these average quantities. Okay? And then finally, at that point, you solve problems with given boundary and initial conditions. And this approach has a sound thermodynamic foundation, and it works well for most materials except when you get to the glass. What we've done is we are now looking at continuum mechanics with fluctuations. And so we are doing absolute violence to what you guys learn in the first page of any transport course. The methodology says the constitutive equations are developed using fluctuating variables. So notice we don't average first. The constitutive equation is the first thing that we write down with fluctuating variables. Then what we do is we find the relationship between the fluctuating field variables and a specific set of boundary and initial conditions. And then finally, at the end, we average, and the averaging is what gives rise to the physical quantity. So notice we have flipped the whole idea of continuum mechanics inside out to do this. Now, we're getting really nice predictions for what's going on. But one of the questions that we want to say is, does this approach satisfy the second law of thermodynamics? And I'll be honest, the answer to that now is maybe. We don't know. So you can understand by doing the violence that we've done to continuum mechanics, we now need to start to worry about whether it really works. So this is a fundamentally different approach to mechanics, and we believe that incorporation of this dynamic heterogeneity is needed to describe these materials. All right. I'm going to change gears right now. This is the traditional chemistry approach. I'm going to describe you a little bit about me. I hope you guys put up with me for the next 25 minutes. Okay? And I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about the career path that I took, and I'm going to talk about the first part, which is traditional, and then the second part, which is going to be non-traditional. So I'm going to talk about where I started. I went to school in Kansas City, okay? I went as a freshman to MIT. I was going to be a physics major. That lasted about 4 days. I learned two things. First of all, the physics majors there were really smart, much smarter than me, so I didn't think that was a good choice. And second of all, they were weird. And I think the combination of me not being smart enough and them being weird, I had a different career path. So I thought about what I'm going to do, and I really did a good job. I loved chemistry and biochemistry in high school, so I said, I'm going to be a pre-med student, okay? So I was a pre-med student, and I was at MIT at that time. My molecular biology was just coming up, okay? It was just being formulated, and it was really chemistry, and I loved it. And I had Nobel laureates that were teaching classes. This was wonderful. Until my junior year, so I'm getting pretty late in my career, I took a microbiology course. And this was one of these courses where they gave you a picture of the cell, and then they said, here's 50 names, memorize them. And then they give you another picture of the cell, and here's 50 more names, okay? I can't memorize. And they said, this is med school. And I said, I better get a different career. And so at that point, I decided what I really was I think, good at and I enjoyed was quantitative analysis. So chemie was a natural fit that was there, and then I brought polymers. I found a polymer project so I could still use my chemistry. So what I did at that point was I graduated in my degree with my BS in chemistry. I then went on to got my PhD at MIT, and then I came to Purdue. I never expected to stay. I graduated during what was called the second boom of the oil crisis. They were hiring like crazy, okay? And I had job offers from chemical companies, from petroleum companies, from national labs, in business and as a technical person, and I had academic offers. I didn't know what to do, so I sat down and made a strategic decision. It was a lot easier to move from academia to industry or a national lab than to move the other way around, so I made no decision. I came to Purdue, and I have been stuck here for 38 years now. So I'm going to tell you how I progressed at Purdue. So what I did first was I took the normal route, okay, that a professor takes. He or she looks back at their PhD program and says, I know something. I did my PhD on filled elastomers, okay? And that's what I did in my PhD, and I absolutely swore I would never do anything again with those dirty, messy materials. I mean, it's what car tires are made out of. You have a rubber, which isn't too bad, but then you add in soot, okay? And the soot you can't characterize. I mean, it was dirty, messy. I mean, literally dirty. I mean, when I made my materials, I would have to put on overalls, et cetera, because I would come out with black all over me. I mean, it was messy stuff. And it was so messy intellectually, I said, I'm never going to do anything with that again. So I said, I'm going to go to this thing called glasses over here, a lot cleaner system. And so I started to work in glasses. So this is the normal type of route that a young professor would take. And I started off basically doing experiments, and then we started developing traditional phenomenological models like the ones I showed you did not work. And we published extensively in that area. And then we brought in something called rational mechanics. That's not my choice of names, but the people that did it said everyone else is irrational. So this is the formulation that makes sure you satisfy the second law of thermo. So we did a lot of work in that area. Well, what happened along the way is I had a really nice colleague, Ramakrishna. Okay? And during this time, he introduced me to stochastic processes. And so we started to say, what would happen if we put stochasticity into these materials or these models? And so that's how we developed the stochastic model that I talked about today. So it was really given by the fact that Ramki was a colleague, and I learned some things from him. All right, now, what happened next? Well, I had another colleague, Venkat Subramanian. Venkat is now at Columbia. He was a systems guy that was here, and he did artificial intelligence. And he and I sort of dabbled together for a while, saying, gee, some of these systems are really messy. Can we do a combination of some physics and some AI sort of machine learning sorts of things? And we did that, and lo and behold, all of a sudden, between the two of us, and I don't know who started this, all of a sudden, we talked to Caterpillar. Turns out Caterpillar has one of the core technologies are rubbers. If you think about it, what fails on a piece of big machinery is not the metal, it's always the rubber gasket, the O-ring, the belt is all the rubber. And so this is an important core technology for Caterpillar. And they said, can you guys, using some of these AI techniques and some of my understanding of polymer mechanics, model that? So we did. So we started up with Caterpillar doing mechanics with ThinkCAD. Something I swore I would never do. But there was a little money behind it, so we all do things for money. So along the way, Ramke again reappeared, and he introduced to me something called population balances, which are ways to model very complex chemical systems. And by using the population balances, we were able to come back and do vulcanization chemistry. And sulfur vulcanization, these are reactions that have 10,000 species. Okay, over 1 million sort of combinatorial terms. We had to develop special purpose compilers so we could write chemistry in near English language, and all of it would be generated. I mean, no graduate student can generate 10,000 equations without an error, but the computer can do that. And so we developed all of that, and we were moving along in a normal way. And so at this point, okay, what was the output? This was traditional academic output. Papers, conferences, and the sort of recognition that academics get. So this was all the normal, traditional career path. And then all of a sudden, something different happened. And so there were some unanticipated opportunities. Okay? Things I didn't anticipate. Now notice, even here, things I never would have anticipated. Man, I never thought, I mean, I was an experimentalist when I came out of graduate school. I never thought I would learn to do modeling like this, but Ramke changed some things. I never thought I'd ever do anything with field elastomers. Venkat changed some things. And so, my colleagues really moved me along. But now some things happened that were unintentional. So this is my non-traditional career path. This is what we had before. PhD thesis, I never was going to do vulcanization chemistry, but I did. And so what happened next? Well, after we were doing vulcanization chemistry, all of a sudden, Nick Delgas and Matti started to work with them, and we could say modeling these tens of thousands of reaction in vulcanization chemistry is exactly what's needed to model olefin polymerization chemistry, okay? And so we did this, and so this was really nice. Nick, I learned how to do kinetics from a real kineticist, and I learned from Matti how to do real chemistry. I mean, he really makes real molecules, okay? And that was the reason I got out of chemistry, because I didn't want to do crystallization again. So Matti's group now does crystallization, great collaboration that is there. And again, this activity leads to papers, conferences, and recognition. We have a large group that works in that area. Typical academic response. Now the next thing absolutely floors me. I do not understand why it happened today. What happened was NSF made a call to me and Nick Delgas and says, will you run a conference on batteries? And Nick and I both looked at the program manager and said, why in the world would you ask us to do batteries? Well, one reason was Sang Kim, Professor Sang Kim here, told them you needed to talk to Caruthers and Delgas, okay? The other issue was that they were trying to see whether some of the AI techniques and then the modeling techniques that we've worked well in materials of polymers would translate to batteries. So we ran a battery conference for NSF, and it turns out that the techniques map really pretty well, okay? Now, Nick and I wrote a report, and I sort of, my hands, we're done, and I'm going to go back and do the stuff that I've always done. Well, Purdue decided at that point that batteries were important, and they had a workshop here, and they asked me to speak and talk about what Purdue batteries, or what batteries we talked about at the NSF workshop. So I shared my NSF workshop, I sat down, and again, I thought I was done, okay? Well, they stood up, this whole group, and says, aha, Indiana was where the electric vehicle, or the vehicle was electrified. Indiana is where the first lead-acid batteries were developed, where the starter motors were developed, OnStar, the radios, all of that was developed in Indiana. And they said, oh, gee, we should be leading the vehicle electrification. And I, at that point, should have kept my mouth shut, but I didn't. I stood up and I said, guys, this is not easy, okay? California, okay, wants to take all this business away. Your real competition is in Asia, okay? This is not easy to do. And so they said, oh, great, we are glad Purdue's on the problem. And I sort of looked around and said, who on Purdue's on this problem? And they looked at me and said, Caruthers, you're on the problem now. So I never expected to do this. So what happened, again, happenstance after that, the economy blew up in 2008, and President Obama decided electric vehicles were the future of the US and decided to pump hundreds of millions of dollars into electric vehicles. There was an electric vehicle education program, okay? So they said, Hubdy Hall looked at me and says, oh, Caruthers, you're going to write this proposal, okay? And I said, oh, gee, okay. So I wrote this particular proposal. We won it, okay? It was a $6 million grant. I mean, that's a huge grant, okay? And in addition to being Purdue, it put me in contact with universities across the state who were also partners in that grant. So I'm now expanding my piece. Part of that proposal was, I said, how can we win? And I said, we can do something that no one else can do. We have this go-kart track out on the west side of campus where we run the Grand Prix. We'll have an electric vehicle go-kart race, okay? I wrote 3/4 of a page and it took me a half hour. No more thought went into that. Well, we won the grant. All of a sudden we have to do it. So, yeah, and the program manager said, Jim, what's your plan for this? And I said, read the proposal. And he looked at me, he read it, and he said, Jim, what's your plan? And I said, read the proposal. And he asked me again, Jim, what's your plan? I said, I hired you. So in other words, we put on this electric go-kart race. Now, interestingly enough, what happened was, at Purdue, I found somebody who I'm now partnered with strongly by the name of Danny White. Danny White doesn't have a college degree, but he has raced Indy cars, he's built Indy cars, and he's been deputy mayor of Indianapolis. I mean, this is an unusual person. So with his skill and a whole bunch of other people that helped, we now run an electric go-kart race. And the electric go-kart race doesn't run just at Purdue, it runs at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway during the 500 week. And we've just been partnered with USAC, which is the major sanctioning body in this area here, and their issue is they want to make this go worldwide. We already have teams from Europe and China that are participating. So this is the collegiate one. Well, what happened next? All of a sudden, we had high schools and middle schools coming to us saying, oh, gee, can you do the same thing for us? And so we're now involved driving using motorsports as a sort of apple, the golden motivation at the end to say, how do we do STEM education? And all of a sudden, I'm now working with people over in the College of Education. So, gee, I've got my name, Arvin, on an education publication for the first time, okay? It was my sort of project ideas, and they now have made it so it's palatable to the middle school teachers. So, okay. So notice, two things none would understand. And so I want to show you a little bit just what we have. That's the go-karts, and these are at the Indy 500. What is next here is we have an emerging high school program. The president, Mitch Daniels, is very excited about this. He wants to have go-karts in every high school in the state that is driving STEM education at the Motor Speedway. And the key issue is not the go-karts. They are just the candy that get kids to do it. It's really the science and math behind the go-karts. There's actually building, so you actually make stuff with your hands, okay? And then we can celebrate them at the Indy 500. All right, now, this sort of shows the curricular components that we have in the middle schools. We have a whole series of programs. It meets state standards. That's really a hard thing to do. I can't do that, but my colleague in the College of Education can do this, and it has hands-on projects. All right, this is my favorite picture, okay? The real output of this is kids. That's an 11-year-old boy. We ran that down at the Indiana State Fair. That day it was 105 degrees, incredibly hot. We have him suited up, and that kid drives that cart, and look at what he comes out. Man, he's got an ear-to-ear grin, thumbs up. That kid is just excited. This is the issue. Can we grab and make kids this excited, and then they're learning science and math? Gee, that's the idea. So the output of this whole program is not publications anymore. The output of this is young people with practical STEM skills. All right, and we're partnered with, this is a whole list of folks we're partnered with. GM is the only one that looks like it's a normal partner for a professor. This is the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. This is the Indiana Race. That's Delara makes the cars. This is the whole Indiana Manufacturing Association. Connexus is an education group trying to deal with education problems in the state. These are, Vincennes and Ivy Tech are two junior colleges, so we're reaching out to junior colleges. Lincoln Tech is a for-profit technical training college. And look what we have down here. We have the Indiana Department of Education. We have a Gene Foss Foundation, Employ Indy. So I mean, it's a different collection of folks than we've normally had. All right, so maybe that was enough, but life has been unusual. Because of this work here, the Crane, which is a naval base in the southern part of Indiana. I'll talk to you later if you want to know why Indiana has a naval base, but we do. It's an enormous, 100 square miles of a naval base. They came to us, and they have a large battery program. They blow up batteries down there, see how they would survive if a bullet goes through them. They said, since we have all of this going on here, can you develop an online program for us? Gee. I said, okay, I guess we'll do that. And that was a real eye-opening experience, because this is the first time we did online education in a substantial way in this department. Well, okay, we had that. I thought that program was winding up. We had our cohort graduate in December of this year, so I thought we were done along the way. Well, last fall, okay, for a variety of reasons, okay, I'm in a meeting with a fellow named Don Foley, and he's vice president at Wiley. All of your engineering texts are produced by him. Bird, Stewart, and Lightfoot came from him. Felder and Rousseau. You look at all of your Wiley textbooks, which is about 40% of what you guys use, he actually publishes them. And he and I were talking, and he said, wow, he says, we got a problem. He thinks the textbook market is going to crater in the next 5 years, because you guys don't read textbooks, okay? Sorry, guys, you just don't. You don't read textbooks. What do you replace it with, okay? And they're talking about online education, and he made the offer to me, really to Purdue, but I was the one who had the offer. He says, you know, if you'll partner with us, we will give you all of the IP in the textbooks. We will partner with you to produce the next generation of textbooks. And they'd like to do it engineering-wide. Well, what are we doing? I mean, again, what happened? I'm sitting in a meeting, never anticipating this. This guy changed it. So what's happening today in this area here is I'm working right now on a Polymer online book, online course, so I actually understand how it works. Okay? I'm doing a little bit of a prototyping of a junior level or sophomore level ODE book, trying to make engineering math actually have engineering in it rather than just math. Okay? And the ChemE faculty is now thinking about maybe the ChemE program should also go that way. Faculty hasn't made a decision yet, but an incredible offer that the major publisher of books comes to Purdue and says, will you partner with us? I mean, an enormous opportunity. Again, unanticipated. So, again, let me go on. Okay, so what have I had here? Notice I have partners, stakeholders in all of this. These are the EV Grand Prix and the Motorsport STEM program. Notice I got teachers, principals, school boards that we talk to, for-profit training companies, associate degree programs, local government, state government, TV, media that we're talking about, online education. We have, again, teachers, again, other universities, textbook publisher, and none of this can ever be done without colleagues here at Purdue. And then I deal with the Purdue administration, go into Mitch Daniels' office. I have to deal with multiple schools, so I have different deans, school heads, and then we have all of the stuff that's engagement, government relationship, and then we deal with the chief IT officer. So the key is, I've been, by happenstance, into these number of programs where the major stakeholders in this are not academics. There's only one here, which is my normal academic content. Now, the university got nervous about this. Okay? They really hate to put professors in front of TV cameras. Okay? They're really afraid of what we are going to say. Okay? So the dean of engineering, decided that I needed to go to charm school. And I don't know whether it worked or not, but she paid good money, Claude, for sending me to charm school. Now, they paid a consultant an incredible amount of money to come and talk with me. Now, he didn't tell me this explicitly, but we worked through this together. So all this money can be resolved into one idea. And that one idea here is the difference between academics and non-academics. When we are academics, the truth matters. When you guys publish a paper, you want to be right. You really don't want to be wrong. We go after the truth. Okay? And in fact, if you're in an academic conference, if you and another group agree on 95% of the problem, you never talk about the 95% you agree on. You go to the 5% you disagree on, and you intellectually fight it out. That's what we do. Okay? And somehow we do it, then when we fight it out, afterwards we'll go to dinner together, okay? So we're okay with that sort of rough and tumble intellectual activity. Now, non-academic perception. They don't care about the truth, I'll be honest. Most of these guys care about the relationship. Can I work with you? Can I get along with you? Are you an okay guy, okay? And so the relationship is what matters, not the truth. And most of these folks up here, it is about building relationships that are there. And so I've had to learn, that was hard for me. I mean, I was over here and I didn't care about the relationship. What I've now had to do is learn how to modulate. And I am not good at it, but I at least know what I should be doing, is that sometimes when I'm talking to my academic colleagues, I need to be over here in truth, because that matters. But you know, when I'm outside of the university, I have to worry most about the relationship. And if things, you know, as long as it isn't ethically wrong, okay, isn't morally wrong, isn't violating a law, you know, and we aren't completely 180 degrees opposed, okay, let's talk again. Let's work together. What can we do together on the parts that we agree? So the relationships. This has been a big learning experience for me to understand that relationships matter. And so, Claude, thank you for sending me to charm school. All right, so I've talked about this piece. Now notice there's a little white piece there, and I hate white spots on slides. So there's one last thing, okay? And this has been happenstance again, and this is a hobby. I'm dabbling at this point, okay? And the place I'm dabbling is something called abiogenesis. So this is orthogonal to anything else I've done before. Well, sort of orthogonal. It really builds out of the polymerization work that we've done. So let's talk a little bit about one of the big questions in life. These are the questions that make us human, okay? Question, where do we come from? Where are we going? What's our purpose? You know, these are the questions that are not taught in 620. They're not about tensors, but they're about the things that make us human and make life worth living. Now, whether you take a theistic view or whether you take a totally materialistic view, this is the sort of idea that we have of where we are today. We live in civilization. We started with the Big Bang, galaxies, planets, then the Earth comes in form, and there's water and land, single-cell organisms, plants, fish, birds, mammals, humans, and then eventually we work in civilization. And so this is the sort of general flow of ideas that we have. And whether you're a theist or an atheist, it doesn't matter. You have the same view of this is what goes on. And this is the region of physics. This is the region of chemistry. This is biology. And then over here you get sociology, history, and religion. So those are the sort of domains. And notice, there is chemistry at some point in this result, okay? And the key questions in this whole idea, the big questions here is, what's the origin of the universe? Where did it come from? How was it come? The second one is the emergence of life. How did life emerge? Okay? And then the final question, and it depends upon your religious and philosophical idea, is over here with humans. It's either the emergence of consciousness, okay, or the emergence of a soul. And how does that happen? So these are the big questions. I'm going to focus back over here on the emergence of life because it has to do with chemistry. All right, now, okay, this is the normal sort of evolutionary idea that occurred, and whether you believe it was a created evolution or whether you believe it was natural evolution, it's the same process. You know, we start with single cells, we get more complex cells, we get starfish, eventually we get a turtle. I like the picture of the turtle and the gecko. Those were sort of nice to me. Eventually a dog, and then we get a man, okay? But notice all of this depends right down here in the beginning point. If you have a materialistic view that chemistry, from chemistry, by chemistry alone, all of a sudden, you get the first single cell, by nothing more than chemistry. And that word for that is called abiogenesis, genesis for the creation, the start of, okay? And abio means without biology. So this is an issue of abiological genesis. And it's really the link between chemistry and biology. And bluntly, this whole evolutionary thing depends on abiogenesis as a linchpin. And so the question is, that I will say, is why this is actually a chemical engineering question. Okay? The question is, okay, can a self-replicating information macromolecule emerge from just the basic reactions to polymerization kinetics? Because over here, it's just chemistry. It's the stuff we do when we model polymerization. And so we have polymerization that occurs here. And the question is, we have to create a macromolecule, has to bear information. So that's a protein, RNA, DNA. Can we have something like that? The key issue is, can it self-replicate? Because if you made it once and nothing happens to the next step, I mean, if you can't replicate, you can't ever use it again. So replication is an issue for this material. So I believe this at its heart is a chemical engineering question, because this is how chemistry makes a macromolecule. All right, so we've done a number, how would I say, I am I'm dabbling in a number of things that are in this area here. And so what I've done is I've created this molecule I call atom. It's the combination of atom, the first, the genesis of humans, and atom. So atom is my molecule that I have. And what I've said is atom is this self-replicating. This is what atom is. It's that string of letters, okay? It's a self-replicating information-bearing macromolecule. So the question is what would I have to do? So atom's length is 52, which is actually a very modest-sized protein. It has 26 letters, and there's 20 amino acids, so more or less this is like a very modest-sized protein there. What I've said is each codon that has this amino acid has 3 base 4 units, and that's just like DNA, where you have C, G, A, and T. So we've taken that particular system there. And then what I want to talk about is copy. So I assume each copy of the codon letter is 99% accurate. And this is incredible chemistry. If a chemist in pristine conditions in the lab gets 80% yield, we think we've done a great job. Okay, but I've taken 99% yield that is here. And then for the 1% of the codon letters that are over here, I just select at random. Okay, one of the 4 possibilities, the other possibilities there. And so it's a very simple idea that is here. And so if we start with 0 copies of this is the initial name. If we do it 10 times, it still sort of looks like that initial idea, but you know, there's some errors in it. By 20, it's getting pretty hard to read, and by 30 copies, it doesn't replicate at all. So what it says is, if abiogenesis is going to occur, okay, the accuracy of the chemical replication has to be incredibly accurate. And the question I'm struggling with now is how, by using the normal chemistry ideas of this primordial biological or chemical soup, can we actually create molecules that replicate at this area? So this is sort of my this is my hobby over here. It uses the single-site polymerization technology that's there. I gave one little component here, but it's starting to ask a completely different question. So if you notice, this slide here is strange. No academic could plan this, number one. Most academics wouldn't even want to do it. But it was an interesting path for me. So as I sort of summarized here, maybe for the graduate students here, what have I learned? Number one, one must work a long time, and my point is decades, okay, in a field to make a real impact on that field. It takes a lot of effort for long periods of time. Okay? Second thing is, I think it's the unexpected opportunities to define a career. Life happens for the things you don't plan for. And so I think this is a case here. But what you have to do, at least in my case, is be willing to reach outside of your comfort zone. Be able to talk to IndyCar drivers, okay? You know, they're not academics, I'll tell you that, okay? Completely different community. Talk to the concerns of middle school teachers. Again, different community. So learn to step outside of your... I believe projects with real impact involve people, okay? They may have technology as well, but real people matter. And so sometimes we forget that inside of the academy here, that what we really are dealing with is affecting society and people in society, okay? I've learned that most folks aren't academic researchers. And for this to work, you have to worry about the relationship most, truth second. That doesn't mean inside the academy we're not worrying about truth, but outside, relationships really matter, okay? And then what I would encourage you all, 2 things. Number one, spend some time thinking about those questions, those big questions that make us human. And then finally, if at all possible, make your career an adventure. I've had a great time here. So let me give some thanks here to lots of folks. I give a thank to Purdue University, the administration, et cetera. They've given me the platform to work here for the last nearly 40 years. When I've sort of, Arvin will tell you, there's a boundary here, and I sort of walk pretty close to the boundary and sometimes step over it and sometimes come back. They've been generous enough when I've been over the boundary to sort of pull me back a little bit and still keep me here at Purdue. My faculty colleagues, I mean, I can't have a better group of faculty colleagues, and I can't have a better group of staff support. This is really my second family. It's my family away from my wife and my kids. This is wonderful. You guys support in all sorts of ways that are here. And then I talk about the graduate and undergraduate students. You're the reason I'm here. You guys are fun. I mean, gee, what is a career to spend this time working with so many bright young people? You're enthusiastic, you challenge ideas, you push us forward. This is just a great career. And so I thank you all for the talk. I'd be pleased to answer any questions, and God bless.
Professor, thank you for your talk. I'm having a little issue reconciling myself with the use of thermodynamic models here. You started the talk by showing us the memory hysteresis and the glass transition temperature. If I had to take a stab at the dark in it, I would assume this hysteresis would imply non-Markovian behavior, lack of detailed balance, therefore not at equilibrium. I think like 2 slides later, you then said we are going to apply thermodynamic models, and then in your stochastic model, you're using white noise, which would imply Markovian behavior. The fluctuation dissipation theorem would only hold at equilibrium anyway. So outside of a breakthrough in non-equilibrium statistical mechanics, can you ever really rest assured that your stochastic models are capturing all the physics here?
That's the key question. I mean, what it does is it operationally captures stuff that no one else can capture, so it seems putting fluctuations in is a critical thing. It intuitively feels correct to say what matters is the local mobility depends upon the local state, not the average. Okay? But the question is a very deep question, okay? And we're working right now on a small paper which has identified, I think, the challenges in doing exactly what you said.
Do you have any interest in putting in memory kernels?
We deal with memory kernels the whole time. I mean, all of the first set of thermodynamics is built around Frechet expansions of functionals. And so that satisfies the memory kernel part. But when you start talking about putting the fluctuations in and then satisfying the other components of that, no, I mean, this is completely uncharted physics that's down there. It's an enormous challenge for that. So. Any other questions? If not, thank you all. Student questions?
I'd like to, if the student questions are over, I'd like to just make a comment, in fact. I think there is a lot said in the intro that Dr. Kokimi gave about Jim Caruthers, and Jim Caruthers himself pointed out many aspects of his career, the traditional and the non-traditional. I can say that in my career, which now spans just a little longer than Caruthers, I have met very, very interesting people. This actually is my 40th year as a professor. But there are very, very few, a handful, who fit, we cannot call it a mold, because actually it's not a mold, fit the kinds of breadth that Professor Caruthers brings. And he's such a delightful colleague in terms of bringing things, new ideas, fresh ideas, as you saw already. But I'm constantly amazed by his, and I didn't even know about this Genesis business yet. But I want to mention one thing that is not so clear from the details that were given. Many graduate students believe that it takes 4 or 5 years to get a PhD, and frequently it does. Professor Caruthers, in fact, got all his 3 degrees in 6 years, actually. 3 years for a bachelor's in chemistry, 1 year for a master's. He switched from chemistry to chemical engineering, and 2 more years to get a PhD. He was 24 years old when he joined the Purdue faculty as an assistant professor in 1977. So PhDs now, we can say that at that time, in the 1977, MIT had low standards. They only had people like Morgan Lewis, Tom Sherwood, Ed Gilliland, and Hyde Hartwell, among others. So their standards were low. But yes, still, to finish in 6 years, 4 degrees is a very uncommon thing. And as I think you have seen in the variety of topics he has covered, I think there was a famous athlete, I think it was Wayne Gretzky, who said it is not where the puck is that we need to do, but actually where the puck is going to go. So that's where how people are leaders who make changes. And I think Jim Caruthers has demonstrated time and time again that he is following, he's defining where the puck is going, he watches where it's going, and he's there before the puck gets there, and then of course the next time it's going to go once again. So I think that a terrific colleague and done so many things for the school. The school is indebted regularly, always, on a daily basis to what Professor Caruthers does. So I would like to once again request you to applaud what Jim Caruthers has done.
Thank you all.